Hello, everybody. Again, it's so great to be here every time. And I have a special person today that I'm just so anxious to talk to him about what he has done. And he was to be known in history for all the things that he went through, because he was in the Nixon era, and you heard of that bit of stuff that went on. And before I even introduce him to you, I'm going to read a little bit about something here and about what he does, because it was awesome. In Pursuit is a gripping tale of a defining moment in American history, the Watergate scandal. And most of you have heard about the Watergate scandal from the word go. Told for the first time by the FBI agent, our one and only John here, who was coincidentally on weekend duty when the burglary occurred. Former Special Agent John Mindermann collaborates with best-selling author Marion Sanchez to deliver an action-packed, ride-along narrative, dramatically unfolding with vivid imagery, high-speed chases, and simmering political interviews. So now I want to say hello, John Mindermann. So glad to have you here.
Good to be here, Dr. Sanchez.
Yeah, it's so great. Your book is awesome, I think, because many people wondered about what happened, but you have the insight on it because you were on the inside of it, and it's awesome. And when I read the book, I said, I got to see this gentleman. Anyway, I'll let you get started on, I won't ask too many specific questions because I just want you to be yourself here and telling us what transpired.
The initial call that came to me on Saturday, June 17th at my home informed me that there had been a burglary and that the local police, the Metropolitan Police in Washington, D.C., had apprehended 5 men in the act of committing a burglary inside the Democratic National Headquarters at the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. They identified 3 of the men who were apprehended as Cuban Americans. And one of the men apprehended as part of the burglary team, they identified as an individual who may have been affiliated with the CIA, perhaps at one time the FBI. So you had an unusual assortment of burglars.
Yeah. 3 of them were Cuban, and the other 2 were not Cuban, but...
The FBI was called because 1972 was an election year. It was a presidential election year. And here was this group in the Democratic National Headquarters with bugging apparatus, electronic surveillance apparatus, and they were actually apprehended by the local police because of a quirk in the security apparatus at the Watergate facility, this massive modern facility that housed a hotel, business offices, and private residences. And actually what happened was the burglars themselves, who were actually committing a series of burglaries over a period of 2 weeks to plant listening devices in the Democratic National Headquarters to monitor those devices, and in this particular entry that they made, illegal, private entry that they made, was to take the devices out. And they were caught because they, unfortunately for them, they left some tape on a door, and a security guard saw the tape that was designed actually to keep the door ajar so they could enter and leave in an access point. The guard called the police, and the police actually dispatched a marked unit with 2 uniformed officers. That unit ran out of gas en route to handle the suspicious occurrence report with the tape on the door. So the backup crew that they sent, they were scrambling to send officers to cover. The backup crew that they sent was an undercover group of 3 officers in unmarked cars and in disguises that were working adjacently on another case.
Wow.
So the lookouts who were supposed to warn the burglars never made the police who were entering to check on the possible burglary, they never made them as cops. So as a result, the burglars were never warned to get out. The cops were coming, and the apprehension was made inside the headquarters by the undercover cops. So in effect, the burglars were apprehended as deep in criminality as you can be
Yeah.
at the site of the burglary, committing the burglary by the police. The FBI got involved, as I said, because there was illegal listening
what were
devices.
you a part of here? You were part of the FBI group at that time?
Correct. I was called considerably after the apprehension on the day, and we began an investigation to determine what kind of devices these men had. And the device that they were in possession of actually was in a duffel bag they were carrying. One of the men was carrying, and the device itself was about the size of your thumbnail.
Holy kettle of fish.
And that particular device was illegal to have in your possession.
Yeah.
You did not have to have it in use. You did not have to be transporting it interstate. Just merely having it was a federal felony that the FBI had jurisdiction over. So that was our legal jurisdiction to begin conducting an investigation. That investigation lasted for in excess of 2.5 years.
Wow.
And it eventually wound its way through the financial maneuverings of the Republican Party, the Nixon administration, on up, and eventually enveloped, of course, the President of the United States, all of his underlings, and the result was that just prior to probably being indicted, President Richard Nixon.
How did that tie in exactly, you know, these 5 burglars that were there and killed for 2.5 years? And then how did that tie into Nixon's situation?
What actually happened was these men were working directly for a unit which President Nixon and his immediate underlings had created, and the name of the unit was the Plumbers. And it was it was called the Plumbers because they entered to fix things, and they were fixing things for
fixing themselves in their pockets.
Right. So they called themselves the Plumbers. They were actually run by a CIA manager, Howard Hunt, who was on leave from the CIA to work directly for President Nixon's re-election apparatus. So the Nixon administration created a separate apparatus adjacent to the White House, in a building very close to the White House, called the Committee to Re-elect the President. They worked directly for the President, and these plumbers were the centerpiece of that unit, which in point of fact had committed a series of burglaries to gain all kinds of information to help Richard Nixon in his quest to be reelected. So the actual burglary itself, the whole concept of what these men were doing under the president, had to do with a very, very kind of paranoid, almost dark view of the political process which was held by the president. And that view then put together this unit, and the unit then went out and committed things which...
Well, it's like they were trying for inside information and committing burglary to get all this going, in other words.
That's exactly correct. That's exactly what was going on. So it was not in any form a clean operation. It was an illegal operation. And to me, what's kind of fascinating as I think back on it is very, very relevant to the kind of atmosphere that we have currently ongoing in the United States.
Even now.
Even now.
At this time. Well, you know, this is what I'm so thrilled to have you here, because you're bringing up some history stuff that's really important. You know, a lot of us knew what happened. Nixon, you know, out the door he went. But what happened prior to that and so forth. And here we have similar, as you say, things happening within the political parties and so forth. And, you know, I hope that somehow, you know, as people watch this film too, they learn something from it too. Wait a minute, what am I doing and why am I doing this? And
it actually, what I came away with from this particular investigation, this particular affair, was this. The individual citizen, whether you're a student, whether you're working on a job, whether you're retired, whatever your capacity, the individual American citizen has a specific responsibility not to accept what is put forth, to question what is put forth, and to really make up your own mind. And don't listen to what is being put your way with a specific overtone or in a propaganda fashion. Look at what the real situation is and make up your mind. The individual citizen, the American citizen, has this marvelous chance to vote and to weigh in on what's going on and to speak up. And that is so important because you do not ever want to put your trust in any particular organization that assures you everything is going okay, and they have your best
interests in mind, supposedly. Yeah.
not necessarily the case.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, tell me more about exactly, how you got involved in the situation when Nixon stepped out the door, right in between all this stuff that I read in your book was pretty awesome. Can you get into that?
Yeah, the case progressed. We got more and more evidence. We continued to work our way, in effect, up the food chain. We had a real excellent opportunity early in the case to interview an individual who was very, very distressed with respect to what she was being forced to do. She actually was an employee of the committee to re-elect the president. She was the auditor. She was the individual who accounted for all of the money that was dispersed in the committee to re-elect the president. And what bothered her was the fact that she had enormous amounts of cash available to her. And individuals would come in and say, give me $10,000, and she'd have to give them $10,000 in cash, or $8,000 in cash, or $20,000 in cash. And she knew that this was not a proper way to do business in any context. So when the Watergate case broke and the burglars were apprehended, she knew that it was her dispersal of illegal monies in the form of cash that funded the burglary.
Oh, boy.
And she realized that she was a part of, inadvertently,
Caught in the middle of it all.
she was stuck in the middle of it all.
Yeah.
And she is a great example of what an American should always be.
Yeah.
She stood up, and at much threat to herself and to her infant child, she was a widow at the time.
Wow.
She had a lot at stake, but she stood up, she came forward, and she gave another agent and myself a very detailed 19-page, single-spaced statement as to exactly what she had been forced to do, who had got how much money, when and where.
She listed the whole works.
She listed the whole thing out, and when we finished writing the report, after an 8-hour interview that went from 7 at night till 3 in the morning, and then it took us another 5 or 6 hours to get the report together. We didn't get it until 10:30 the following morning, but it turned out to be 19 pages of absolutely dynamite revelations about illegal activities in terms of the funding of the activity. So it was that particular interview that broke the case open and pointed us specifically in the direction of the White House and President Nixon. Up until that point, we had kind of a bifurcated effort where we were looking at both President Nixon's apparatus and the Republican Party. We were also looking at the CIA. As you're probably aware, the CIA is prohibited from doing any surreptitious entries or any activity on domestic soil. But in point of fact, the men who were committing the burglary at the Watergate facility were CIA operatives. The individual operating the entire burglary team, who had done a series of burglaries in addition to this one where they were apprehended, was a CIA manager. In fact, he was a key manager in the Bay of Pigs fiasco out of Miami, Florida.
Now, did these guys know that they were infringing upon the law, that they weren't supposed to be doing this, and they went ahead anyway? Did they know that, or were they unaware of?
My opinion that they had to be totally aware of exactly what they were doing. They were professional CIA operatives. Okay, so they knew exactly what they were doing.
And why were they doing this? What was at stake for them? Their jobs if they didn't do what they were told, or what?
It was really very, very sad. My partner in the key interview that I conducted, a very, very excellent agent, was Paul Magalinas. Paul was the son of Mexican immigrants. Paul was raised on the south side of Chicago. He was a teacher when he entered the FBI. In fact, he taught Spanish, and he was studying law at night when he entered the FBI. Paul is a very, very fluent, native-speaking Spanish language. So Paul actually interviewed the apprehended Cuban burglars in jail at the D.C. Metropolitan Jail. He interviewed them in Spanish.
Okay.
And it was very, very revealing because the burglars said to Paul, we're not in any trouble because you and I work for the same person.
Yeah.
We work for Richard Nixon. These burglars thought because they were CIA and we were FBI, we work for the same person, so we don't have any problems, okay?
Yeah.
We had to explain. Paul had to explain to them in Spanish. No, you've got it wrong.
You got a problem.
Okay? We work, the FBI works for the American people to defend the Constitution and the Republic. We do not work for the President of the United States.
Okay.
So this was a real revelation to the Cuban burglars.
I can imagine.
Yeah. So there were many twists and turns in the Watergate case.
Well, this is what makes it so interesting. My talking with you about these things. You know, we know some of the things out here that happened and so forth. You know, and then Nixon ends up fired and so forth.
Right.
What were the things going on in between? And this is kind of what you're filling in. It's beautiful, you know, to know this. And at one time, the American people would have been shocked at what it is. And it's still a shocking situation. And as you said, and I agree that perhaps somehow it lends itself to what's going on now.
It does. It does. It absolutely lends itself. In fact, the past year or year and a half, the number of inquiries that I've had about, well, you worked the Watergate case, and you know what's going on today, and so forth. Do you see any parallels? And I'm watching things unfold, and I see the same elements present to a certain degree in the current administration, the way it's being handled, and the actual kind of outlook and elements of paranoia and defensiveness, and also not being candid is also one of the elements which you see in the current administration that was very, very present in the Nixon administration, trying to manipulate things, trying to, in effect, get one over on the public. And ultimately, of course, that's not possible. That's not going to happen.
And, you know, I didn't at first do this, but I do want to show the book that you wrote called In Pursuit is the name of the book by John Mindermann here. And it's pretty awesome when what it reveals. And it's kind of the inside story. And this is what grabbed me when I first saw the book, too. I said, whoa, this stuff is dynamite, you know. And at this time, it's not that much. It's not something you can light up and it's dynamite, it blows up. Right. But it's stuff that was at one time really dynamite at that time. And here we have kind of an open book on what happened in between all of this stuff.
Right.
And let you go ahead and what you were saying here.
Yeah, so there are many parallels, I think, between what happened in the Watergate case and President Richard Nixon, and perhaps what the general tenor, the general thrust, the atmosphere is in the current administration. From what you can see, kind of watching the cable television, reading the newspaper, getting a feel for what's going on, I have a strong sense that the same kind of atmosphere, the same paranoid, suspicious atmosphere is a part of the Trump administration that was a part of the Nixon administration. And that's, in my view, that's from my experience in working the Watergate case, that is not a healthy thing.
Yeah, wow, and that's happening right now. And if people become aware of this and more of what you're saying, you know, I think maybe they can begin to start thinking about this again, you know. And
I think that's what makes the interest in the Watergate affair, in President Nixon, I think that's what kind of has rebooted, brought about a re-interest, a heightened interest in what went on with President Nixon.
Now, what I'd really like to get into the kind of the moments that were happening, and then all of a sudden Nixon gets bombed. Let's put it another way, he goes out. But can you get to those moments that just prior to what happened there? Before he got...
Yeah, it was a series of things that occurred, and one of the things that was very, very strong and makes the FBI a powerful but a good institution overall on the American scene is the fact that FBI agents are oriented toward taking independent action.
All right.
And that is extremely valuable because it places a heavy responsibility on each agent. So as you work together in investigating anything, and this in the Watergate case, you're working together on a very high level, complex investigation, you have an opportunity to bring your own thoughts, your own way of doing things, and contribute to a group. And through the group process, you come out with the very best way generally to proceed in handling something which is very, very tricky. The independence also brings a kind of truthfulness to the overall product that the FBI investigator can come up with, because there were a couple of times during that case where the lead agent, that is to say the agent responsible for running the case, complete case, had to actually go up against and had to engage in a kind of knockdown, drag-out fight with our superiors to get something done. And he was able to do that, and the individual agents are able to come head-to-head with their superiors in making a point and saying, you know, we don't agree, we need to go ahead and do this. And frequently, you're able to move ahead and overcome administrative resistance to doing something.
Well, I want to read something in the book here that is a letter that you received, and it was J. Edgar Hoover, and what it said to Mr. John W. Mindermann. Dear Mr. Mindermann, your performance in detaining an individual who is attempting to assault police officers was excellent, and it is a pleasure to take this opportunity to commend you. This prompt and aggressive manner in which you and associates handled this after was responsible for the arrest of this man by the local police. I certainly appreciate your noteworthy efforts. Sincerely yours, J. Edgar Hoover. That's a pretty awesome letter to get from J. Edgar himself.
Yeah, I got a couple from J. Edgar Hoover, and I was very, very proud of those letters. It had to do with some work that I did in the field. In one case, I was sent on a very rainy day to apprehend an individual who had committed a bank robbery in Maryland and had escaped from the local police. Were in pursuit of this individual. The individual fired a shotgun at the police and slightly wounded one officer. The car that he was fleeing in turned over in Washington, D.C. That's how I happened to get involved. And when I arrived on the scene, he had fled and had hidden in a residential area, so it was a situation where myself and two other agents had to go down alleys behind townhouses and do a search in the rain to try and find the individual with a shotgun. And the particular alley that I went down, he was hiding down a stairway with the shotgun. So I was able to find him and confront him and take him into custody without any kind of exchange, the shotgun and the pistol. And so the director was kind enough to send me a letter saying, attaboy, good job, you know, keep working in this way. The other one had to do, I got a second letter from him. The other one was much different. I was actually working in an undercover capacity in, if you recall, during 1971, 1972, long time ago. These were called the days of rage, when the country was engulfed in all kinds of demonstrations because of the Vietnam War.
Right.
And we had as many as 10, 15,000 people demonstrating in Washington, D.C., blocking streets. So I was undercover within the groups themselves.
Oh, really?
Okay, yeah. I was sent in an undercover capacity to actually be in the group and keep track of what was going on and report back.
Yeah, you know, the association you're saying right there, just in the paper the other day I was reading where there was another policeman in a group like this. But in that situation, he got manhandled by some other police.
There were. That's
you read about that?
Oh yeah. It's very dicey, very dicey situation. But briefly, in that situation, what I did was one of the demonstrators was actually firing upon the it was much like what's going on in Paris now. You have the rioters or the demonstrators, then you have the police line. Well, I was with the rioters and the demonstrators, and the lines would go back and forth, and one of the persons in the demonstration side had a commercial grade steel or aluminum slingshot and was firing ball bearings at the police. Very dangerous thing to do. So as the line would go back and forth, the individual would fire and hit a police officer. So what I did was I maneuvered to get very close to the demonstrator, and as the line got close to the police ranks, I was able to use my momentum and grab this individual, run him toward the police, and actually take him into custody.
Holy cow.
Because he was committing a very, very serious, it wasn't a demonstration, he was actually trying to maim or disable the individual officer. So I was able to take him out of the group and into custody. So there's kind of police action sometimes that you did, and there were these intricate investigations. There were action activities such as bank robberies that I got involved in. Then prior to that, I had a career as a local police officer here in the Bay Area, where I had a lot of experiences that I went into. So all in all, I was kind of a lucky guy, really, getting put in these different.
Well, when I read your book, this is what inspired me to have you talk with us, because so many things in here, my gosh, a lot of people have read this book, but I hope you, and I'm not pushing to sell a book, but I hope you do buy one in any case, because it's quite revealing in what he did. Also, an interesting thing about the people that helped him write the book here, Brian Solon. There's a picture of a little girl here who was the daughter, and she happened to be the daughter of, the mother of Solon.
Right, that's right. And we were raised together. She and I were raised together.
And you were, it's just a coincidence.
Very coincidental.
Awesome.
This greater Bay Area, millions of people, and this happens, It's been a great opportunity, Dr. Sanchez. I really appreciate you inviting me over.
We got 3 minutes here, and I want to show you this picture. I don't know if you can see it or not, but even here is a picture of the young lady who was the mother of Solon here, and that's pretty awesome. Anyway, I do want to thank you very much, John, for being here with us, and I hope maybe you can come back, because you had some really interesting things that happened, and I haven't even talked about it yet, but they were quite interesting. Like you went in this bar and having a drink there, and something happened there, and you were right in the middle, in time. And that was the fire you were talking about, right?
Right. When you fire and disarming people. A lot of different activities.
Absolutely, So I want to say thank you very much for watching us, and mayhaps we'll have him back again if we're lucky. And I thank you, John, again. Put it there.
Thank you, sir.
For being with us.
Appreciate it, Dr. Sanchez. You've got a great department here. Appreciate it.
And I will see you all, folks, in the next week for another show. Adios.